Question, can Illinois give Oregon problems? Answer, yes, and I know how.
You are Locked On Ducks, your daily podcast on the Oregon Ducks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, it is that time once again for Locked On Ducks. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view of the day. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, and your number one source to stay up to date with the Ducks. Today's episode brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet, and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Should more young guys see the field along the defensive line in particular, and what are the Big Ten title game scenarios Oregon fans should be aware of? All coming up on today's show. But Illinois is up this week. I'll have Sonny Verma of Locked On Illinois, or Locked On Illini, rather, on the show tomorrow. Illinois, Illini, you get the idea. But for Illinois, this is a team, comes in 6-1, ranked 20th in the country, yet they're a 3-touchdown underdog. Now, I've seen underdogs bigger than that lose outright, or win outright, rather, in this college football season. So yeah, Oregon's got to be able to look at Illinois and treat them as a threat. And I think the one way that Illinois wants to win this football game is, some of you Oregon fans are going to hate me for bringing this up or saying this out loud, but it's the God's honest truth. Make the game look like Oregon-Stanford 2012. Final score 17-14 at Autzen Stadium. Oregon had a high-powered, high-flying, explosive offense, and Stanford was able to keep it under wraps. How? They played solid defense. They ran the football, killed the clock, limit possessions. That is the formula here. When you look at this Illini team, they have been really stout on the defensive side of the ball so far this year. Their offense has been good enough. It has been good in spurts. Luke Altmaier is a much improved football player from a season ago. But the formula for Illinois to push Oregon or try to pull the upset of the now number one ranked Ducks is to play a limit the possessions game. Illinois' offense cannot go blow for blow with Oregon. If you get into a track meet, a shootout, Oregon's going to be more explosive. And this Oregon defense, remember, as I talked about earlier this week, is kind of 55-45 the identity of this Oregon team. So it's not going to be easy for Illinois to score points either. That's another reason I don't see a track meet coming here, as improved as Altmaier is, and as much as Oregon has to be able to keep him in check. And I think they will be able to do that. But the one way that I think Illinois can give Oregon fits is if they play ball control. If they find rushing success the way Purdue did a week ago. Purdue, frankly, had stretches where they were moving the ball at will on the ground on this Oregon defense, and then they short things up. They batten down the hatches, tighten the screws, and then they'd force either a field goal attempt or a punt or force a turnover, or once Purdue got on the other side of midfield, they really, really struggled. Well, if Illinois finds that same sort of success running the football and they execute better once they are getting close to the scoring area, yeah, they can absolutely push Oregon in this game. As is usually the case, though, if Oregon goes out and plays their best football game, they'll cover that 21.5 point spread, according to our friends at FanDuel. They can absolutely do that. And when I look at this Illinois team, I see a team that's already picked up a handful of ranked wins. Now, not all those teams are still ranked. In fact, none of them are, but that's in part because Illinois beat them. Illinois beat Kansas earlier in the year and sent them into a downward spiral. And Illinois beat Michigan a week ago and knocked them out of the top 25. Like, they have played some really quality games this year. They went on the road and beat Nebraska, again in a game that was a little bit lower scoring. It went to overtime, and Illinois ended up getting the win, but Nebraska shot itself in the foot, or else they would have won the football game at the end of regulation. So this is an Illinois program that feels like they are on the rise, that feels like they're on the upswing. Luke Altmaier is a good quarterback. He was a 4-star recruit coming out of high school, originally went to Ole Miss, got beat out by Jackson Dart, no shame there, and he transfers to Illinois, has turnover problems last year. He's rectified that. And he's got a 15-1 touchdown interception ratio so far this season. Pat Bryant and Zachary Franklin, who we'll talk about in just a moment, have been his two favorite targets. And their passing game, it's not anything special. It's not anything incredible, but it is capable, and it has its moments. And Zachary Franklin, actually, once upon a time, was at UTSA with our guy Will Stein, current Oregon offensive coordinator. And he's someone who I think Oregon kind of briefly looked at, or at least I remember talking about him here on the show as a potential transfer target at wide receiver. I didn't think it made a lot of sense, but certainly he's a guy who has been productive and has been a key part of this Illinois offense. But their rushing offense, it's been okay. Their passing offense, it's been okay. But the way they have won football games is kind of with their defense and just making winning plays. That's the best way. I've watched several Illinois games this year. They don't wow you on offense, and they're not littered right now with NFL guys on defense, though they've put guys in the NFL over the last couple of seasons. They're just solid. They're a very solid team. Bret Bielema has been a head coach in college football for a long time. A lot of Oregon fans might remember Bret Bielema as the head coach of Wisconsin when Oregon won the 2012 Rose Bowl with Darren Thomas, DeAnthony, LaMichael, and Kenyon, and all those guys. Lavoisier Tuine had a big game in that one. That's the last time that Bret Bielema went up against an Oregon team, and he's still around. Why? Because he can still coach. He is still an incredibly solid coach, and I don't think Illinois is the sort of program that you ever expect to be a perennial conference title contender, but can they be an Iowa, maybe a Wisconsin, where, once every 5 to 10 years, maybe they're able to get themselves into the conference championship game? Yeah, I mean, I don't see why not. They've got a decent recruiting base. They've had some recruiting momentum in the last couple of years, and you have a head coach in Bret Bielema that knows what he's doing, and these are the results for Illinois. And yeah, Oregon can go out and out-talent them at a lot of positions. I was listening to an Illinois insider on the Autzen Audibles podcast, and he was talking about how he didn't feel like the Illinois defense rather had enough team speed. Well, that's got to be a red flag if you're an Illinois fan, and a green flag if you're an Oregon fan. Because what does Oregon have offensively? A lot of speed. A lot of speed. Maybe not as much at the running back position. They don't have a scat guy, like DeAnthony or Charles Nelson or someone like that. But at the wide receiver spots, you got Kenny Sadiq. You've got, I don't know if Trayshawn Holds going to play this week. Justice Lowe looks really good, though. Filling in for him a week ago. Evan Stewart, of course. Tez Johnson. A lot of speed. So much like last week against Purdue, I think there will be sequences in this game where Oregon's offense has an easy time moving the football. But if they give it to Illinois, that run defense that, was okay last week against Purdue, Oregon got outrushed against the Boilermakers. Of course, won the game 35-0. But if that run defense isn't able to shore up whatever issues they were having last week, and Illinois finds that sort of success, I expect Bret Bielema to employ kind of the Oregon State tactic from earlier this year, where they're going to run the football, they're going to pick up a first down, then they're going to use 30 seconds of the play clock, and they're going to use 25 to 30 seconds of the play clock on every snap, and they don't want Oregon's offense to be on the field a lot. So that's what Oregon has to try to avoid. I think that's the game plan Illinois is going to come out with, because recruiting-wise, talent-wise, speed-wise, yeah, Illinois is outmatched in most areas where you look, and we'll dive into that even more on tomorrow's show, but that doesn't mean that formula can't work, because Oregon was a lot faster than that Stanford team back in 2012. Now, granted, DeAnthony was a little too fast and didn't throw the block down the sideline, but that Stanford team probably was a little bit better and had a higher ceiling than this Illinois team, but this is a good football team. They're well-coached. Their quarterback's playing well, they can play defense, and they got a couple of playmakers. So that's how Oregon could get a challenge here from Illinois. Let me know your thoughts in the YouTube comments, or hit me up on X, formerly known as Twitter, at @McLaughlin CFB or at Locked On Ducks. Those be the handles. Jeremy also asked if Oregon will unveil throwback uniforms after Illinois did last week. Did you see the Illinois uniforms last week? Oh, Nike helped them out, of course. The helmets, incredible. It would be a fitting response. I haven't heard that there are going to be new throwback uniforms for Oregon this week. I'm going to go out on a limb and say they go all green. I think that's what they'll do here. That's my uniform guess for the week. But those Illinois throwbacks last week, so unbelievably good. The helmets were incredible. Each one took like 2 hours to do. Shout out to the Illinois equipment staff. I don't know why I keep calling them Purdue. Probably because they played Purdue the week prior. Does Oregon need to ratchet up the rotations on the defensive line? I think it's a fair question to ask. I have a simple-ish answer, and it's coming up next. First, this episode brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. When you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role, and that's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help find the right professionals for your team faster and for free, which is a really good price. LinkedIn isn't just a job board. LinkedIn helps you hire professionals you can't find anywhere else, even those who aren't actively searching for a new job but might be open to the perfect role. In a given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users don't even visit other leading job sites. So if you're not looking on LinkedIn, you're looking in the wrong place. On LinkedIn, 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. Hire professionals like a professional on LinkedIn. 2.5 million small businesses are using LinkedIn for hiring. Why? They know what's up. That's why. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Little light lemonade for our second segment sip today. I'm a huge proponent of light lemonade over regular most of the time. Regular can get too sugary. You don't get enough lemon in there. I'm a big lemonade guy. Big lemonade guy. Oregon's defensive line rocks, but we haven't really seen that many young guys, at least not in the early rotations. Does that need to change? That's a question that one of you asked. If you want to ask one, YouTube comments, X formerly known as Twitter, or if you want priority access and all sorts of other perks, become a Locked On Ducks insider. It's a free 14-day trial, then just $5 a month. Link in the description below. Alaska Duck Dynasty, nice, asks about 2024 true freshmen and whether or not more should be playing, or why aren't guys like Aiden Breland, for instance, regularly seeing the field. And he also asked whether Jakeem Stewart could play if he commits to Oregon. Now, he's the number one defensive lineman by most services, I'm pretty sure, in the class of 2025. He's reclassified. He has not committed to Oregon, but Oregon definitely will have a chance there. Now, the line that Dan Lanning has used in the past when asked about true freshmen playing is, if you're good enough, you're old enough. And I get these questions not infrequently about, hey, why isn't this guy playing? Or, hey, why isn't that guy playing? I think there are a couple things at play. First of all, Oregon's got a lot of really talented guys. And you have players that are not seeing the field regularly who could go to other quality programs in the Big Ten or elsewhere and probably play a lot. But they've just acquired talent at a really, really high rate. And it's hard to see the field, especially the true freshmen. And I think with regards to the defensive line in particular, I can't look at what they're doing up front and say, boy, I wonder why the true freshman isn't playing. The defensive line is so good. I hyped it up as much as any unit, maybe more than any unit, all offseason. I said it'd be the best since 2014, and I think it is. Which is pretty incredible since they lost their top 4 interior guys from a year ago. Dorless, Popo, Rogers, and Taki Taimani, all gone. And yet that unit looks even better somehow, which is a testament to what this staff has done over the last couple of years with talent acquisition. I mean, Amari Washington looks great. And then Derek Harmon and Jamari Caldwell, Harmon especially, those are just home run hits in the transfer portal. So I understand where you're coming from, because there are a lot of talented guys who could be great players for Oregon one day in that defensive line room. It's really hard to argue with the results. It's really hard. Like, could these guys wear down by the end of the year? I don't think they're rotating quite as much as they have in the past, but I still see plenty of Amari Washington and plenty of Keon Ware-Hudson, and I think those are their 4 interior guys. Harmon and Caldwell are first, and then Washington and Keon Ware-Hudson get in there next. And when there have been garbage time situations, we have seen true freshmen like Aiden Breland on the field, or a redshirt freshman like Terrence Green or Ashton Porter, or who's another? Tioni Gray, true freshman, 4-star guy that's gotten into the mix. And it gives you a glimpse into the future for 2025. But I don't look at the defensive line unit and see any major drop-off in the fourth quarter of football games. Didn't see that against Ohio State. So at least at this point in the year, they haven't worn down. And as for the second point I want to make about, if you're good enough, you're old enough, true freshmen have played in every season in some capacity for Dan Lanning. Like that has been a staple. So I think he does mean that. I don't think it's just a coach speaker, just a quote he's given the media for people like me to run with or whatever. Like, I think he is deliberate in saying, sending a message to his team like, hey, if you got the stuff, you can play right here, right now. Poncho played last year. Josh Connerly played in 2022. And yeah, it's been harder for true freshmen to find a role consistently on this year's team. But it's not as if we haven't seen it before. Jaleel Florence played back in 2022. And, some of the true freshmen that, had a chance to have maybe a bigger role this year were guys like Peyton Woodyard in the secondary. He's on the second unit with Tyler Turner at the safety position. Either one of them or both of them could be Oregon's starting safeties next year. Or keep going down the list here in my head. I think this might be the first year where you don't have, I'm trying to make sure I don't miss everybody. I'm going through every single position group, but yeah, there haven't been as many this year that you see on the field, but it's not as if we'd never seen it before. I mean, Poncho was literally the number 6 offensive lineman last year, first guy off the bench. Without an injury being required, he subbed in for Marcus Harbor and Stephen Jones at left and right guard last year regularly. That was a frequent occurrence. So Jordan James had a role to play as a true freshman back in 2022, and look at where he is now. So yeah, I think that it's hard to argue with the results along the defensive line. They are deep and talented in that particular room. And I do think if you're good enough, you're old enough. But if there are talented veteran guys ahead of you, it's really hard for a young freshman to come in and be ready to pick up the scheme, not make mistakes with, coverage assignments if you're in the secondary, or blocking assignments along the offensive line, or understanding the playbook if you're a wide receiver or a tight end. Like, that's asking a lot for a guy to just come in and be able to do that right away. Defensive line isn't, I don't think it's as hard schematically to pick up, but I do think it's harder to physically be ready to go against other Power 4 offensive linemen right away. So, long-winded answer there, but good question. That's a good question to ask. And I don't think we're going to just, never hear from all those guys. Sure, some guys might transfer out after this year, but I don't think it'll be a mass exodus. Braxton asks, hey, Spencer, where do you think this receiver group ranks among all-time at Oregon? Tez, Stewart, Holden, and Lowe are one of the most elite groups in the country this year, IMO. Yeah, that stands for, in my opinion, for those who don't know. Last 2 years, both receiving groups, I'm calling it a wash between this year and last year because 3 of the guys are the same as last year. Put Terrence Ferguson in there. 4 of the 5 guys are the same, and you swapped out one NFL wide receiver, Troy Franklin, for another Evan Stewart. And Evan Stewart is the big play guy, and Troy Franklin was the big play guy. Best receiving room I have seen in Oregon in a 2-year stretch, and I expect it to continue. The talent they have in there is crazy good, and it's just been awesome the last couple of years. Junior Adams, whatever he's paid, it better be enough because he has been recruiting and developing and having his guys produce at a high level. Best Oregon receiver room now and last year than there's ever been in my lifetime. And I don't even, there have been some really good ones. I take this one over any of them. And any day of the week with the plays they can make. Like Evan Stewart against Ohio State. I love Jeff Mel. He's my favorite receiver ever. He can't do that. I don't think he could have done that with regard to the catches that Evan Stewart is making all the time. But yeah, it's awesome. It is a good time to be an Oregon quarterback. You got plenty of guys to throw the football to, and there are going to be plenty of more guys as the years come on. The last question for this particular segment, and there are more to answer later because we're always jam-packed here at Locked On Ducks, is one of you asked me, a Locked On Ducks Insider did, about whether more commitments could be on the way. So Oregon is red hot right now. Number 1 team in the country. Dan Lanning is firing on all cylinders, 7-0, big favorite. Like, everything looks really, really good. I am not aware of any recruit who has changed a commitment date because of something that's happened during the season. I've heard of recruits, Kayvon Thibodeau comes to mind, make up their mind during the season, but they don't change their announcement. So, yeah, Oregon's 2025 recruiting class, still comparatively small. I saw an on-3 prediction, by the way, for Brandon Finney to flip to Penn State. Hopefully that doesn't happen. He recently got bumped up to a 5-star status by 24/7, I think on 3 or Rivals, was not sure. But talented guy, blue chip cornerback prospect from the Pennsylvania area. So yeah, if Penn State were able to flip him, you'd see why. But I would be pretty surprised, given the big recruiting weekend that Oregon had against Ohio State for that game, and that they won that game. They had, I know for a fact they changed, or not changed, but heavily influenced at least a couple of kids' minds. Like, there are going to be commits that roll in the next, month or two. National Signing Day is about 2 days away for the class of 2025 in the early window. There are going to be kids who will get asked and will say, yeah, that Ohio State game really, really swayed me towards Oregon. So have patience. I don't have dates or expectations or anything like that, but certainly there will be momentum on the trail because of how Oregon has performed on the field this year. It's a really good question. Really good question. And there are more of them. There are more of the Big Ten championship game scenarios. This could get wild. This could get wild. I'll tell you how next. After I tell you about FanDuel. So, NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. It's America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you're placing your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. So FanDuel has got Oregon as a pretty sizable favorite right now. They're also the favorite to win the Big Ten. They are the #4 favorite to win the national championship, tied with Texas, so I guess tied for third, behind Ohio State, and Georgia is still #1. And this week against Illinois, Oregon is, drumroll please, in a top 20 matchup, -21.5. That's a big number. That's a big number. But as I talked about earlier, they can cover that number. The total's 54.5. What does that tell you? What does that tell you? That Vegas thinks Oregon might win this game 38-7. They could. They could. However you feel about it, one way or the other, check them out at FanDuel.com. Alex sends in this question asking about Big Ten title game scenarios. And yes, it could get wild because Oregon, Indiana, and Penn State don't play each other. Is Ohio State rematch the most likely outcome? What about Indiana? He also said, I heard you talk about Oregon Golf Club. Had the chance to play there in a work tournament a couple weeks ago. A beauty, but very weird. That's an accurate description. I didn't have one iron shot that I could hit comfortably. I guess that's what you get on mountain courses. There's not a flat lie on that entire golf course. I have played it several hundred times. There's not a flat lie to be found out there. Just a reality, but helps you for other courses. To your question, though, is Ohio State bound to meet Oregon in the Big Ten championship game if Oregon wins out? I think so. Now, this is my opinion, of course. I have watched Indiana. They are a good team. They have to go to Columbus. They have to go to Columbus. By the way, their quarterback, Curtis Rourke, is injured, not playing against Washington this week. They're still favored by 6.5 points, but Curtis Rourke has to get back, or Indiana will fade out of the Big Ten title picture eventually. They can still be 9-3 and be a great story in college football, which they are right now, but he's got to get back and be healthy. I came away from that Oregon-Ohio State game thinking these are the two best teams in the Big Ten and that they're bound for a conference title rematch as Oregon and Washington did a season ago. Well, I have not changed that particular opinion. That Ohio State roster is still really good. Will Howard going to end with the best season of his career because he's got great weapons around him, a really good play caller, a really good head coach, and their defense is really good. But Indiana has to play Michigan. That's not going to be that hard of a game to win. Michigan cannot complete a forward pass to save their lives. They've got to go to Ohio State, and Ohio State has to go to Penn State. I think Ohio State's winning both of those games. So for me, that's the most likely outcome. If everyone goes undefeated, meaning Indiana, Penn State, and Oregon, it'll come down to basically who has the strongest record against the Big Ten. Like, who's beaten the most teams with the best record? Because there will be no head-to-heads between Indiana, Penn State, and Oregon. These sort of chaos scenarios are worth discussing. They don't come to fruition as often as people think. Penn State is, I think Penn State is good. do not think they're as good as Ohio State. I think the Buckeyes will go in to State College and win that football game. I think they'll beat Indiana as well and rematch with Oregon in the Big Ten championship game, which is what I thought would happen before the season. Tyler asks if there's any concern about the offense from the 9-yard line and in. Not really. The red zone's tough. The red zone is tough. And Illinois' defense this year, by the way, has been pretty good at preventing their opponents from scoring touchdowns. They've only done so on 56% of their red zone drives. It's a pretty good percentage defensively. But I think for Oregon, the offensive line can do a little bit better job of running the football. But, I mean, I don't blame you for asking the question, Tyler, just to be clear, because it's a valid thing to ask when you look at what Oregon has done offensively and where there still leaves something to be desired. It hasn't always been easy in the red zone. I don't think it's holding Oregon back in a significant way. Like, if you look at the stats of what they have for a touchdown percentage this year, you got those 3 Dylan Gabriel interceptions that were all picked off inside the 5-yard line. Well, he appears to have cleaned that up, as it's 2 weeks in a row without one or even putting the ball in harm's way. And also, you know why it was so hard to score against Purdue? Because the officials wouldn't just say what we all saw, which was Jordan James got into the freaking end zone. He was in. That was, gosh, that was infuriating. But I'm not concerned about it. It's not like I think they've been perfect in the red zone or that they are great all the time. I think they have been more than serviceable because the offense scoring plenty of points. They're scoring plenty of points. I don't have a major concern about it. Some of you might, and that's okay. Bud asks a couple of questions. What should be done about officiating? My mom she had many lessons she instilled in my brother and I growing up that I'm very grateful for. One of them was life is 10% what happens to you and 90% how you respond to it. I have, for a long time on this show, stated, and Oregon fans asked me this as the Ducks went into the Big Ten, well, is officiating going to get better? Now that they're in the Big Ten, they're out of the Pac-12? Like, nope. Every fan base thinks their conference officials aren't good. And conference officiating, league officiating in college football, it's become a big topic of conversation. Why? Most of them are not that good. And this is just where I've gotten to. I stop expecting them to make the right call, and I'm more surprised when they do. And that's the best advice I can give. Like, getting more technology involved sounds like a great idea. The NFL tried that on reviewing pass interference. Yeah, it was a mess. They overturned like 4% of calls or some, I don't know if that was the actual number, but it was under half, way under half, when coaches could challenge pass interference calls. You just have to find a way to live with it. Find a way to make sure that the officials can't influence the game. That's the answer. And the frustrating thing is there are great teams out there like Ohio State, and it's going to be a close game no matter what, and officials can't influence it, and there's nothing you can do about it but call it out and hope that one day they can be held publicly accountable, but I don't think that's going to work. I've heard from people all the time, or those within the industry or people who have been officials before, like, well, there is a system. They're held accountable for this. I'm like, okay, it's not working. Whatever you're doing, not good. Do we need to make them full-time officials so they can work it this year round? Fine. Big Ten and the SEC are signing billion-dollar media rights contracts. Make your officials full-time. If you think that'll help, go for it. I don't have my hopes up, though. I have seen too much incompetence from officiating crews to think, yeah, they could fix it. No, they are trying to get it right. They do want to get it right. They just can't. They just can't. I'd start with the full-time move and go from there. If you could design a new offensive play with a Duck-themed name, what would it be and how would it work? I'd call it Quack Attack, and it would be a double end-around pass with a post and a wheel up the sideline from the tight end, like what Idaho did to score that touchdown to begin the second half back in week 1. Yeah, put that in there and call it Quack Attack. Bud also asked about Oregon men's basketball being picked number 36 in the AP preseason poll. By the way, I not really jokingly tweeted out when Dana Altman was asked about injuries a while back, well, we're mostly healthy right now. Like, oh, dude, Why are you saying this out loud? Oh, what do you know? The Georgetown transfer Supreme Cook is going to be out until mid-November. Hope it doesn't linger. But I think number 36 in the preseason, I think that's an appropriate place for Oregon to be. And less than 2 weeks away from the regular season starting, by the way. And I'm incredibly bullish on what this Oregon men's basketball team can be. They were picked 6th in the Big Ten media poll. I think they are going to finish higher than that if they stay healthy. But that is an if, because the injury bug lives in Eugene in just the biggest way possible. And I don't know what it is, but it's been there every time. So fingers crossed, I will say. But as I have talked about before on the show and everydayers are aware of, I'm more bullish, or I was more bullish on football coming into the year. But I mean, my hype level for Oregon basketball on the men's side, about 85 to 90% of what it is for football. Like, they should be an at-large tournament team this year. They had a little scheduling change because of one of the events they're in. Creighton is no longer automatically on their schedule, but they're still going to be able to fill that with a quality non-conference opponent. So that's okay. Like, yeah, there's the Dana Altman connection, but I just lost to Creighton, so don't know if I need to see that one again per se. A little revenge could have been fun, but what I was more concerned about initially was, well, they won't have the quality non-conference opponent. Kind of need that to build an at-large tournament resume. But if they end up playing somebody like Alabama or Houston, they will have that opportunity again. So, yeah, season's less than 2 weeks away. If you ever got basketball questions, by all means. I don't ignore basketball. I'll be watching just about every game. Ben asks to wrap up today's long and jam-packed show. So I have a question. I know you're a play caller for SUU. Play-by-play announcer. I am definitely not a play caller, though I did get to call a play in their JV scrimmage because I was talking to the coach, and he said, what do you want the first play to be? And it was the Quack Attack one that I mentioned. My question is more of an industry understanding question. What does that feedback look like to, you mean to say, play-by-play announcers that cannot pronounce our players' names correctly, as well as the name of our state? Thanks, Ben. Social media, that's it. Like, I'm here to tell you, and this is disappointing too, and feeds off the officials front, there is not an accountability method. How many years did we have to listen to Lou Holtz mispronounce the state of Oregon? How many years? No one said anything. No one cared, or at least no one said anything that was able to get through to Lou Holtz to let him know, hey, you're saying this wrong. This is incorrect. A producer, I presume, probably saw Tim Brando getting roasted on Twitter for mispronouncing and not even being close on Tatum Tuiyoti's name. And then he apologizes in the second half and says, well, I think I got it right most of the time in that first half, but I apologize if I ever said it wrong. I'm like, dude, you didn't say it right once. What are you talking about? The unfortunate thing that I see, and I listen to this stuff and follow it incredibly closely, there are a lot of announcers that get to a higher level and they start to get lazy on their fundamentals. They do. Not knowing names of starters, that's lazy. There's no other way to put it. I've mispronounced names before on a play-by-play broadcast. I fix it in real time. And it's not because I didn't look at the pronunciation guide ahead of time. It's because sometimes I just didn't work on it enough or thought I was ready and wasn't. And it's unfortunate, but the only mechanism for that to happen in real time is for a guy to get toasted on social media, as Tim Brando was, deservedly so, and for one of his producers to see it or for him to see it. And it's more likely that one of his producers would see it and then come into his ear and say, hey, you're messing this up. But yeah, I've done that. I've done that before during Southern Utah games. I've tweeted at other athletic departments before and been like, hey, just so you know, your announcer is not pronouncing this particular name right. And then it gets corrected. And it really frustrates me because that is the most baseline level of respect you can pay to a team to show you care about what you are doing, is to get their names right and take the time to learn them and read a pronunciation guide if you've got tricky ones. So it's disappointing. But is there a great accountability method? Nope, there isn't. And we just have to live with that, I guess. Not the note I want to end the show on, but that's where we're at right now. So tomorrow with Sonny Verma of Locked On Illini. That'll be fun. Appreciate everyone listening. I'll see you next time. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and go Ducks.